this weekend, I've been sort of promising we'll have a look at this chart. And so here it is, everybody. Here's what we've been waiting for. And there it is. Oh, you can sit there.
I
That's
can.
very good, yes. Okay. Well, maybe I should look there too. Except it's not quite as clear. I'd sort of rather look at this one. So yes, the launch of Artemis II was delayed by about 10 minutes for some slight technical problem, which immediately said to me, oh dear, this is something that we're going to have to watch. And of course, as soon as I set the chart up for 10 minutes later, Neptune came even closer to the angle. So I remain a little bit concerned about Saturn and Neptune being on the angle. And obviously when they're safely down and the mission is accomplished and all's well that ends well, we will re-examine that Saturn-Neptune conjunction on the angle and look for other meanings in that, as opposed to the fact that it looks as though something technical or some unforeseen weather conditions or something may actually cause a little bit of a problem. They've had a couple of issues, you know, nothing really serious, but just a couple of issues. So, you know, I sort of, as I said, remain hopeful but concerned. And because I've got the launch of the 1969 Neil Armstrong walking on the moon one, which is a much stronger chart, much more impactful, and of course it was historical, but this in its own way, I don't know how many years it is, 50 odd years since, 50 something years since Apollo, was it Apollo 13, Apollo 17, can't remember which Apollo it was, 1972. So it's, in a way, it is important. But we look at the full moon, it took off at full moon, and at first I thought, well, maybe that is because there's a perfect alignment with the Earth, the sun and the moon, and that means the trajectory and everything else that's purposeful. But there have been other launches and they're not at full moon, although, well, we'll look at the 1969 one in a minute, which from memory isn't a full moon. But again, this USA Saturn crops up because the sun at 12 degrees of Aries, and the moon here is at 10 degrees, wasn't quite full, but the US Saturn is there at 14 degrees, and of course Jupiter is squaring that full moon. Now that actually does give a sense of vavavoom, you know, it gives a sort of sense of jubilation and enterprise and all those things that are good. It's also that Jupiter is, it's quite close to the US sun, so there is a sense that this is a real statement about, you know, we're going to the moon and we're going to effectively going to be the first country that will place itself again on the moon. China a little bit behind, because it's all important to get all the minerals. So it's quite a statement, Saturn, Jupiter, and we've come across, Saturn is a bit wide of Jupiter in this, but remember when we've got Saturn introduced into all those electional charts, horary charts, in the medieval times, before we discovered Uranus, there was always this sense if you had Jupiter and Saturn aligned in some way, it has to do with state, it has to do with power, it has to do with all sorts of things to do with the treasury and finance and all of that. So I think Jupiter on high, squaring that full moon with a reference to the USA Saturn and the USA Sun gives us a sense of purpose. At the very least, this chart shows its purposefulness. And there are, a few other things. The USA Uranus at 8 Gemini is square the node at this point. The USIC 1 Aries and 3 minutes. And of course, here we have Uranus 28 of Taurus square the US moon. And we're seeing this differently. We've already looked at the solar eclipse from the perspective of having been the signature on the war in Iran. But in a funny kind of way, that solar eclipse picking up the 28th degree is also the signature on this magnificent venture. So we have our signatures here, our interesting points to pick up, but I remain a little bit concerned about, you know, that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And I don't know what you have to say, Steve. I'm sure you've got some
I'm probably
insight.
a bit more concerned than you.
Oh, right, okay.
Firstly, with the adjusted time, the ascendant is now on the point of September the 21st eclipse and the recent new moon in Pisces.
Right.
On a slightly more facetious level, the idea of Jupiter being square with Sun and Moon, for those of you who are British, to me, the imagery here is that of Patsy from Ad Fab. Very ebullient, very over the top, big hair, and just larger than life, and there's a little bit of that. But the Neptune on the descendant, it does worry me a little bit, for two. On the one hand, I don't believe that this moonshot is being done in a film studio, but with Neptune on the descendant, some people will probably say that because they always do. But I won't, like Penny, I will not be happy about this until they're back on solid ground. I know if they're going to follow all other moonshots, then when the capsule comes back to Earth, it will land in the ocean. And with Neptune on the descendant, that concerns me just a little bit. So let's get them back on solid ground, and then I'll see it as a success.
Yeah, and I think, I could be wrong here, but I think in terms of the USA, certainly, they haven't gone as far as the moon since, you know, 1972. So, you know, this is the furthest they've gone. So it is a very important stage. It's both important for PR. It's like, we can do this, and we're going to stamp our flag on the moon again, and we're going to get ahead of you, China. So it's a very big PR exercise. And maybe that Neptune, yes, that's an interesting point about the idea there's some camouflage, there's some agenda here that maybe we're not too sure about, or something going on that's perhaps for us not to see. And hopefully that's all it is, and it isn't that there will be some, you know, extraordinary problem.
I did have one other thought on this. In the photo that was sent back today, the Hello World photo, they're now so keen to point out that the bright white dot to the bottom right of the Earth was actually the planet Venus.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, because Venus is in that photo. And I noticed that Venus is square Pluto.
Right.
And just before the takeoff, there were problems with the toilet system. And Pluto deals with lower body functionality.
Yeah, no, it's always in the stars, isn't it?
Quite literally.
So I want to move on and show you the moon landing, the Neil Armstrong trip. How much more impressive this chart is. Look at that, on the exact Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I mean, if anything is like, you know, adventure, you know, how far can we go? How can we break, you know, convention? You know, we're doing a giant breakthrough here. We've got a man on the moon. That's so Jupiter, Uranus in a way. And at the time of takeoff here, we have 28 of Aquarius rising. So again, we have a nod to the USA moon. And of course, Uranus, the USA Uranus is 8 degrees of Gemini, which is on the IC. So we really do have references as to the history of this history-making event, which I think is much more pronounced in this chart. And yeah, Neptune is a member of the family here, sort of widely conjunct Mars, but and I suppose it is squaring the ascendant-descendant axis. And we don't know if there was any problem. I don't seem to remember. They went up and down, and it was a great success. But of course, all the conspiracy theories that there were shadows on the moon, and you can't have a shadow on the moon. So these were all interior shots. They were done in studios. And I'm sure that some of those were interior shots and used at different intervals just to, you know, sort of flesh out the picture. But the fact that Neptune was squaring those two angles does introduce, and Mars is sort of conjunct Neptune again. It's very interesting. It may be, you know, that whole statement about going further than man has ever gone before is a little bit